Hi Prep 4, I've just finished our first Zoom assembly this morning, which was really lovely to see you all. So I'm now going to record the next couple of chapters for our class book Friend or Foe for next week. If you are following at home, we are on chapter 3, which is page 34. So enjoy. The last leg of their journey was bumpy, noisy, smelly and draughty. But for David and Tucky, it was the only enjoyable part of a long day. Now they were no longer going away, they were arriving. Every jolting minute was bringing them closer to a new home. They sat forward in their seat, anxious for the first glimpse of the cottage, and then the thin beam of the headlights caught the glint of black windows ahead, and the car bumped off the road down a rough track and stopped. Mr. Reynolds clicked open the latch on the front door and had to bend his head as he went in. It was a long, low kitchen with a stove at one end and an oil lamp burning low on a table. It smelt of cooking and oil fumes. Mr. Reynolds picked up the lamp and led them up a narrow, winding stairway. "I told you you'd have to be in together," he said, turning up the lamp. Shadows lightened and the room grew bigger. "But there's good in everything. You'll be warmer this way. Your wash basin's on the chest and there's a lavatory just outside the back door through the kitchen. Don't forget to turn out the light before you go to sleep, will you?" He ruffled Tucky's hair and smiled broadly. "You'll be all right then, my dears." Mr. Reynolds," David corrected himself quickly. "You said you were married. Where's—" "In bed, my dear. Anne's gone to bed. We get up with the light here and try to go to bed when it's dark, same way as the animals. You'll be seeing her in the morning." He turned to go. "Good night," said Tucky. "Good night to you both, and never you worry, us'll be all right together." The door closed. David tried the water in the wash bowl with the tip of his finger, but that was all the washing he did. Tucky didn't even bother to do that. He had his pyjamas on in a flash and was in bed before David had started to undress. Once in bed, the two of them lay staring up at the bumpy ceiling. "Wonder what's happening to the others," said David. "Suppose we'll be like brothers, you and me. Kind of, anyway." "Something like," David muttered, wishing he'd kept his socks on like Tucky. "I like that, Mr. Reynolds," said Tucky, and he pulled the quilt up tighter to his chin to shut out the cold air. "Wonder what she's like, Mrs. Reynolds. Anne, he called her, didn't he?" "Be all right if she's anything like him," Tucky said. "What, beard and all?" "Get off, didn't mean that," Tucky giggled. "Turn that lamp down, like he said. Here, listen. You can't hear anything and you can't see anything. Can you hear anything, Davy? Davy? David?" But David was asleep, and before he had time to worry about it, so was Tucky. In the morning, it was the smell that woke them, and they dressed as if the house was on fire. They opened the kitchen door quietly. There was the sizzle and smell of frying eggs, and the thick, gluey bubble of simmering porridge. Mrs. Reynolds was bent over the kitchen stove with her back to them. She was small and slim, and her dark hair was done up in a bun. The boys waited for her to turn round and see them, neither of them wanting to make the first move. They stood transfixed by the smell until Mrs. Reynolds turned with the saucepan of porridge in her hand. And here is a picture of Mrs. Reynolds. "Morning, Mrs. I'm David and he's Tucky." David came further into the room. Miss Reynolds' eyes widened in shock, and they saw the porridge saucepan jolt in her hand. She looked from one to the other, and then put the saucepan down slowly. "You frightened me for a moment. I thought you would still be in bed. I was going to call you when Jerry came in." There was something different about her voice, and David noticed it immediately. Yesterday, he had become used to the sing-song burr of the villagers. That was difficult enough to understand at times, and they did have some funny ways of putting things, but this was the halting accent of a foreigner. "Of course, Jerry has told me about you. He said you look like ghosts, no red in the face. And he was right too. A good hot breakfast and a day outside in the country air. That would be good for you, no? I'm Anne. You must call me Anne. And you are David and Lucky?" "Tucky," said Tucky. "It's Tucky, Tony Tucker, but everyone calls me Tucky." Good. So you are Tucky and you are David, I'm right? The boys nodded. Now come and sit down at the table. Jerry will be in soon. He has to milk the cows and feed the animals all before breakfast, you know. Breakfast lived up to expectations, and Anne fussed over them until they could eat no more. Just as they finished, Mr. Reynolds came in. Feel better then, my dears? There's not a better cook in all England than my Anne. No doubt about that, no doubt at all. My mum's good, said Tucky. Course she is. Mr. Reynolds was pulling off his boots by the door. I forgot that. Let's say my Anne is the best cook in Devon, and that with your mother, Tucky, and David's mother here, the champion cooks of London. There's not a cook in the kingdom to touch them. Agreed? Agreed, said David, anxious to repair any offence Tucky might have caused. Tucky always said what he felt, and David was used to that by now. Anne bustled over to Mr. Reynolds now, prattling on happily in her strange accent. Everything about her was small, and next to Mr. Reynolds she seemed even smaller and more delicate than she was. There was a gentleness in her eyes that was immediately comforting to David and Tucky, and whenever she smiled, and that was often, her whole face seemed to shine. Tucky studied Mr. Reynolds as he devoured his breakfast. Can I see that baby horse? He asked suddenly. Baby horse, baby horse. Mr. Reynolds roared with laughter. Did you hear the boy, Anne? I told you, my dear, 'tis a foal, not a baby horse. A baby's a small one of us. Never make the mistake of thinking animals are like us. There's names for animals and names for us, so that we can tell the difference. Animals are animals. You and me, Anne and Davy here, we're people. That's different. Baby horse or foal, Jerry, Anne said. I think Tucky wants that he should see him. And so he shall, Anne, my dear, so shall they both, but after I finish my breakfast, if they can wait that long. For David and Tucky it was worth waiting for. All that day and the next they saw things they'd never seen before as Mr. Reynolds shepherded them along the farm. They watched him helping the foal, born the night before, pulling him up on wobbly legs. They discovered that the sheep on the steeply sloping fields were not wild after all, and the 3 milking cows, golden brown and white patches, wandered slowly towards them and did not attack. They watched Mr. Reynolds delivering the early spring lambs and helped him bring in the ewes that would be lambing soon. Then there were stakes to be driven in for fencing, water to be carried to the troughs in the field, and yards to be cleared. The 2 boys went everywhere with him, and Jip, the black and white sheepdog, trailed along behind them. By Sunday night, David and Tucky knew their way round the farm and felt as if they'd been there for months. They felt at home. Neither of them had given Islington or home a thought. They had been too busy for that. In bed that night, the boys lay in the darkness, whispering. Which do you like best? Said Tucky. Can't say, David whispered back after a long pause. I wish my dad was like him, Tucky went on. I've never heard him shout, not like my dad. My dad's always on at me. My father never shouted, not often anyway. David tried to picture him shouting and he couldn't. Can you remember your dad still? Course I can. He was only killed a year ago. Last month. Course I can remember him. Bet you hate them after what they done to your dad. I would. Course I do. Everyone hates them. And David tried to imagine his father's plane crashing on the beaches as he'd done so many times before. I think she hates them too, Tucky whispered. Who? Anne? I asked her if Mr. Reynolds was going to go away and fight, and she said he wouldn't be going. He's got to work the farm, and anyway, he fought in the last war, wounded and all. Then she asked me about my dad, and I told her, and she asked all about you and your dad, so I told her. She went white as a sheet. Honest, she did. Didn't say anything, but she hates them, I can tell. You shouldn't have told them. That's private, just between us, said David. But she asked Davy. I had to tell her, didn't I? Couldn't lie, could I? School tomorrow, David muttered. Be funny, all of us together in a different school, with different teachers. Wonder how all the others settled in. Wonder what the teachers will be like. Can't be worse than Miss Evers, said Tucky, and he tugged the quilt farther from his side. You keep putting it over your side. I was frozen this morning when I woke up. And David tugged it back and buried himself further down into the bed.